Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and yesterday's podcast was all about whitefly, and I thought I'd actually continue the theme and talk about whitefly again, because I forgot to mention their unusual life cycle. I did mention I'm watching Alien Earth, the series based on the Alien films, and very similar life cycle, except there's no face huggers when it comes to whitefly. So he said that whitefly are true bugs. They belong to the same type of insects as aphids, the hemiptera, and they feed on plant sap, just like aphids. They're very small like aphids, but probably not as small as an aphid. So they have powdery white wings that make them look like tiny, tiny moths. The crucial thing here is that the females lay the eggs on the underside of plant leaves, whereas an aphid can give birth to live young, even pregnant young. And they often are on the stems. They will be on the underside of the leaves as well, but whitefly are exclusively pretty much under the underside of the leaves. And these eggs hatch into mobile crawlers after 6 days. So these are wingless, sort of funny-looking insects, and they remain in the same location. These eggs, these crawlers, stay there for maybe up to 6 days. Once the crawlers find somewhere to feed on the plants, they lose the ability to walk. They lose their ability to walk, and they eventually form a scale. So a bit like scale insects, but not as big, not as large, and not as strong, not as powerful, and as structurally sound. But they are related to scale insects, so they form this scale, and they remain in place throughout the immature development, so about 16 days for that, so much longer. You won't be able to see these unless you're really looking for them, and that's why you need to get in there with a hand lens. They then pupate in the scales and emerge as winged adults from the nymphal case and leaving empty skins. You'll see these. The scientific names for the empty skin is the exuvae on the leaves. So even if you've no longer got whitefly, you will still see the remains of the pupal cases. That's very different to something like a thrip, where the pupas fall to the soil. And so you are able to control whitefly if you spray the underside of the leaves, whereas with thrips, a whole part of the life cycle is somewhere else in your grow room or your greenhouse. And then the adults can live to up to 3 weeks and often found in mating pairs. And the females are larger than the males. So that's interesting that they hang around in pairs. Isn't that lovely? Loved up whitefly. And then obviously a female can lay about 100 eggs in her lifetime, often in fairy rings. So you'll find those in circles on the underside of leaves. So you need to be able to differentiate what those look like compared to, say, ladybird or other beneficial insect eggs. Okay? Obviously, the times that they take to develop, those times quoted, will vary depending on the temperature at which they're growing and also the species. There are over 1,500 species of whitefly, and most of them are inconspicuous and never reach densities high enough to cause damage to host plants. There's a few species that are major pests. And so Burmisia tabaci, the sweet potato whitefly, is a very common one. The greenhouse whitefly is another one. And so they're all in that Burmisia genus, the ones that cause problems. We said yesterday that they cause problems because they suck the sap, the energy, the life force out of the plants. They can also excrete honeydew, just like aphids can, which can cause black, sooty mold on your plants. Very, very damaging to crop quality and appearance. And all of the insects in the hemiptera, so aphids, scales, whiteflies, what's the other one? I can't think of it. The one with like the powdery white stuff on. That'll come back to me. They all transmit viruses. So they all transmit hundreds of viruses. So another good reason to control whiteflies. If you get an infestation or even just a few plants infected or with just a few whitefly. Mealybugs. I didn't have to Google that. I just had to think for 5 seconds. Mealybugs are the other type of insect in that insect family. Then finally, one thing we didn't mention yesterday that is also important for aphids is that if you finish a grow, don't leave a few plants in there. give it a good couple of weeks to prevent a green bridge from forming. This will mean that any adult whiteflies need to be on a host. They'll die after a day or so off the plant without feeding. The eggs, if you've got grow media, you might still have eggs or even pupa, especially if you've got dead plant material there. So if you can remove the grow media and any living plant material, that will help form a gap in the growing period that could help control whitefly, aphids, and any other sort of pests in that family, the Hemiptera. So it doesn't work for other things like thrips because the pupa will be on the ground and things like this, but it will work for these sorts of insects in most cases. We had some issues where we removed all the plants, but there were still obviously eggs in the soil, and so we got reinfection of our grass plants with aphids. But hopefully, you'll get less starter material if you remove that green bridge. What else can we say? What else has been going on? As I say, I've been working on microgreens. Got some really good microgreen trays. They're like green trays with white inserts and a clear plastic propagator on top. You can buy these on Amazon and other places. They're really good, but they're designed to have soil in or grow compost. And I'm trying to go for a compost-free microgreens production. You find on YouTube, a lot of the microgreen growers are grown with compost. I want to do a full hydroponic microgreen setup. And they come with pieces of paper you're supposed to grow the seeds on with your fertigation solution. I have basically found that these pieces of paper are rubbish because you basically need to be there every 4 hours to re-wet them, which is no good. So I've decided I've set up a system where I've cut a big slit in one of the trays, one of the holders, one of the sieves, and I've got white towels that I've cut up, and then I'm using that to wick the fertigation solution from the reservoir at the bottom up to where the seeds are being held on the matrix. So I'll report back on whether that was a success, but I've got high hopes for this. I think this is going to be a good way of micro green growing that involves hydroponics. Because at the moment, most of the hydroponic growers, they're just using cocoa or just compost, standard compost. It's not really hydroponics. So let's see if we can get a simple no pump microgreen production setup. If you've grown microgreens without compost or coir even, then let me know. Got any tips? I'd be very, very glad to receive them. That's been Hydroponics Daily for today. The life cycle of the whitefly. As I say, they don't look nice either, these nymphs, these crawlers, and especially when they pupate, it does look very much like an alien, especially with the eggs in a circle, very sinister, very much like the alien xenomorph life cycle from the Alien movies. Have a look into that. It's a good watch. All right. Thank you very much for listening for today, and I'll see you again tomorrow with more exciting topics on Hydroponics Daily. Goodbye.